Admit It, The Strange Tale of Depsey the Rabbit. Chapter 2. Behind the Scenes, The Protection. The applause faded to a distant murmur as Depsey closed his dressing room door, the solid wood muffling the sounds of the audience filing out of the Blame It on the Ink Playhouse. He loosened his red bow tie with a sigh of relief. Another performance finished, another day safely behind him. The harsh fluorescent bulbs above his makeup mirror cast everything in clinical white light, so different from the warm amber glow of the stage spots. His reflection looked tired, but satisfied. The haunted house episode had gone well, despite Chuck's enthusiastic overacting in the kitchen scene, and that moment in the basement when Lucy's timing had been just slightly off. The dressing room smelled of grease paint and old wood, tinged with the metallic scent of stage dust that never quite settled. From beyond the thin walls came the familiar sounds of a show ending. Stagehands striking the haunted house set, pulleys creaking, the ghost rigging being coiled for storage until the next spooky episode. The comfortable sounds of theatrical routine that had shaped his life for so many years. Depsey removed his yellow suspenders and settled into the chair before his makeup mirror, but his eyes drifted to the bookshelf that dominated the far wall of his dressing room. It was an odd piece of furniture for a performer's space. Dark wood, almost Victorian in its heaviness, filled with scripts and theater journals and acting manuals. Most cartoons kept their dressing rooms light and cheerful, but Depsey had always preferred this more substantial presence. On the middle shelf, wedged between a collection of Shakespearean comedies and a manual on physical comedy techniques, sat an old leather suitcase, brown and battered, with brass corners that had gone green with age. It looked like something a traveling salesman might have carried decades ago. Depsey's mother had given it to him when he'd first started in theater, claiming it belonged to some distant relative who'd been in the business. He'd never found any use for it. Too small for costumes, too large for makeup. But somehow he'd never been able to get rid of it either. Now it served as a kind of talisman, a reminder of family and tradition, and the long history of cartoon performers who'd come before him. Sometimes, late at night after particularly difficult shows, he'd find himself staring at it, wondering about the cartoon who'd first carried it, what dreams and fears they'd packed inside its worn interior. Behind the suitcase, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a small space where the bookshelf didn't quite meet the wall, just large enough for something small and precious to hide. Depsey glanced at the door, still locked, then moved to the bookshelf with practiced stealth. He reached behind the suitcase, his fingers finding the familiar weight of the small jar wrapped in an old program. His daily supplement, the doctor had called it, something to keep his energy up for the demanding performance schedule, to help with the nerves that had gotten worse over the years. One drop on his tongue, bitter and cold. A moment of dizziness, a flash of something unpleasant, falling maybe. Green fog, someone calling his name from far away. The feeling passed quickly, leaving behind a sense of protection, of safety, like invisible armor settling over his shoulders. But sometimes, in the quiet moments after taking his dose, he could swear he heard other voices, distant voices, younger voices, as if the protection somehow connected him to something far beyond the cartoon world. He wrapped the jar back up and tucked it into its hiding spot, just as a sharp knock rattled his door. "Depsey, darling, are you decent? I'm coming in regardless." Lucy's voice, bright with post-show energy and theatrical exhaustion. He moved quickly away from the bookshelf, straightening a script here, adjusting a theater program there, making sure everything looked casual and undisturbed. "Just a moment," he called out, checking his reflection one more time, smile ready. The door swung open before he finished speaking, and Lucy Teacup swept in with all the dramatic flair of a leading lady making her entrance. Stage dust still clung to her porcelain handle, and there was a small smudge on her rim that spoke of the evening's more vigorous scenes. "Those stagehands nearly fumbled my entrance during the bedroom sequence," she announced, settling gracefully onto the small velvet sofa that served as the room's only guest seating. "I specifically told them about the timing. How difficult is it to set a teacup gracefully? It's not exactly advanced stagecraft." Depsey found himself grinning as he moved to help her with the smudge, dampening a makeup cloth at the small sink. Lucy's post-show complaints were as much a part of their routine as removing grease paint. "And that trapdoor timing was completely off," she continued, her golden crown catching the fluorescent light as she gestured. "Listen. Poor Chuck practically disappeared into that haunted house science lab, whatever it is, before he could deliver his trademark jug. He seemed to enjoy it," Depsey offered, dabbing gently at the spot on her rim. "You know how he loves the physical comedy bits and conspiracies. You know that bit about the broadcasting. It was his idea." "Oh, he would. That boy would find the conspiracy in a Sunday afternoon." Lucy's tone was fond, despite her complaints. "Speaking of which, have you seen him? He was muttering something about research when we took our bows. I swear that chatterbox gets more excited about his theories than he does about actual performing sometimes." Before Depsey could answer, the door burst open with Chuck's characteristic enthusiasm. His yellow body practically vibrated with leftover performance energy, his black bowler hat sitting askew on his head from the evening's adventures. "Did you two feel that audience tonight?" he exclaimed, bouncing slightly as he spoke. "The energy was incredible. Really felt like they were with us every step of the way. More connected than usual, if that makes sense." "Every audience feels different, Chuck," Lucy said with patient affection, settling back into the sofa. "That's the magic of live theater. No two shows are ever exactly the same." "But this was special," Chuck insisted, fishing enthusiastically in his jacket pocket. "Which reminds me, I've been reading Gosling again." He produced a slim volume bound in academic green. "Broadcasting and Theoretical Remote Observation." Lucy's theatrical sigh was audible across the room. "That goose publishes more theories than the entire university library. What's his latest flight of fancy?" "Moving pictures," Chuck said excitedly, his eyes lighting up with the fervor of someone who'd discovered a new obsession. "The idea that someday we might be able to transmit our performances through the air itself. Imagine! Cartoons all over the world could watch our shows without ever leaving their homes. Or even..." He paused, consulting his book. "Professor Gosling theorizes that we might eventually reach audiences beyond the cartoon world entirely." "Through the air," Lucy repeated flatly, one delicate eyebrow raised. "Like flying programs? Magical theater brochures that travel on the wind?" No, through some kind of broadcasting waves. Professor Gosling thinks it might even be possible to watch performances happening in real time from anywhere in the cartoon world." Chuck's enthusiasm was infectious, even if his explanations weren't entirely coherent. "He calls it remote observation technology, the ability to see and hear things happening far away." Depsey felt a small chill run down his spine, though he couldn't quite say why. Something about the idea of distant watching eyes made him uncomfortable. "Sounds a bit far-fetched, doesn't it? I mean, how would that even work?" "That's what they said about Dr. Moose's experiments," Chuck said, flipping through his book with practiced ease. "Remember him? The brilliant scientist who was studying the rift before he fell in." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Dr. Moose's fall into the rift had been one of the great tragedies of the cartoon world. A respected academic who'd spent years studying the mysterious phenomenon that dominated their horizon, getting closer and closer to its swirling lights, until one day he'd gotten too close. "Poor "Poor dear," Lucy said softly, her voice taking on the gentle tone she used when speaking of the departed. Chuck interrupted. He was so convinced he could understand what the rift actually was. All those expeditions to get closer, all those measurements and theories about the light patterns and the way sound bends around it. Depsey felt his stomach drop. Dr. Moose hadn't fallen. Depsey knew exactly how the respected scientist had ended up in the rift. The memory of those trusting eyes, the moment of betrayal, the sound of falling. His daily supplement suddenly felt insufficient against the wave of guilt that crashed over him. Professor Gosling says Dr. Moose's research notes are still some of the best documentation we have about the rift's properties, Chuck continued, oblivious to Depsey's growing discomfort. The way the light pulses in patterns, the strange echoes, the way it seems to watch the cartoon world. Professor Gosling thinks Dr. Moose might have been onto something genuinely important about dimensional observation points and theoretical viewing portals. Well, Lucy said briskly, clearly wanting to steer the conversation away from disappearances and toward more pleasant topics. Speaking of missing persons, have you noticed we're down quite a few regular players lately? Benny Balloon hasn't been on the schedule in weeks. Probably found work with one of the traveling troops, Depsey said, perhaps a bit too quickly. You know how it is in this business. Better opportunity comes along, off they go to seek their fortune elsewhere. Still seems odd, Chuck mused, settling into the room's only other chair. So many all at once. And that nice Violet Vine who used to do the afternoon nature shows. Haven't seen her in ages either. Plus Tommy Teapot from the Variety Hour and Sally Sunflower from the morning children's programming. Depsey forced what he hoped was a casual shrug. Show business, you know. People come and go. Maybe there's just more opportunities out there these days. Or maybe, Lucy said with a knowing look, they're all being lured away by promises of starring in that new Felicia Figtree production that everyone's been talking about, on location with Felicia. At the mention of Felicia Figtree, Depsey felt his stomach tighten. The rising star had been making waves throughout the cartoon entertainment world with her unique blend of elegance and oddly mesmerizing stage presence. Rumors suggested she'd been discovered by Dr. Dinglegreen himself during one of his talent improvement consultations. The name Dr. Dinglegreen sent another chill through Depsey. The same doctor, the same voice, the same toothy smile, the same promises of improvement and protection. I heard she's a bit of a loon, but a fresh one to be sure, Chuck said, his natural curiosity overriding any concerns about professional jealousy. Something completely new and different. The studio executives are apparently very excited about her unique qualities. Unique is certainly one word for it, Lucy said dryly. Have you actually seen her perform? There's something almost hypnotic about the way she moves. The audience can't seem to look away when she's on stage. It's like she has some kind of, energy flowing through her. Depsey had seen her perform, and Lucy was right. There was something unsettling about the way Felicia commanded attention, something that went beyond mere talent or charisma. When she performed, the theater felt different, charged with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand up, almost like she carried something inside her, something that transmitted itself to the watching crowd. The executives love her, Chuck continued, oblivious to Depsey's growing discomfort. I heard Westward and Vulture are already talking about making her the new face of the studio. At the mention of the studio executives, all three friends shared a collective grimace. Westward and Vulture were the kind of businessmen who saw cartoon performers as products to be marketed rather than artists to be supported. They'd been pushing for improvements and innovations that usually meant more work for less creative freedom. Speaking of our beloved executives, Lucy said with obvious distaste, Has anyone else noticed they've been lurking around backstage more often lately? Westward was practically breathing down my neck during dress rehearsal yesterday. They're probably just keeping an eye on things, Depsey said, though he'd noticed the increased executive presence too. Making sure we're meeting their standards. Standards, Chuck scoffed. You mean those bean counters have standards? Where? Show me where they keep their standards. As Chuck spoke, he began his characteristic wandering around the room, his natural curiosity making him examine everything with the intensity of a detective looking for clues. His gaze swept across the makeup table, the costume rack, the theatrical posters that decorated the walls, and inevitably landed on the bookshelf with its collection of scripts and manuals. This is quite a collection you've got here, Depsey, he said, moving closer to examine the titles. Shakespeare, Molière, some of the classic cartoon comedy manuals. Oh, and this old suitcase. Depsey's heart began to race as Chuck moved closer to the bookshelf, his yellow hands reaching toward the leather case that concealed his secret hiding spot. Chuck! Depsey's voice came out sharper than he intended, causing both of his friends to look at him in surprise. He forced a laugh, moving quickly to position himself between Chuck and the bookshelf. Leave my bookshelf alone. Chuck looked hurt, his enthusiasm dampening slightly. I was just admiring your collection. I didn't realize you were so protective of your books. It's not that, Depsey said, scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't sound completely ridiculous. It's just, some of those things have sentimental value. My mother's suitcase, first edition scripts. I get nervous when people handle them. Of course, darling, Lucy said smoothly, though her eyes had that sharp, observant quality that made Depsey nervous. We all have our precious things. Chuck, you wouldn't want people poring through your research materials, would you? I suppose not, Chuck said, but he was still looking at Depsey with puzzled concern. I want to know about the past. You know to understand the future. For research, Professor Gosling says. What research? Lucy asked, settling back onto the sofa with renewed interest. Well, Chuck said, his enthusiasm gradually returning, I've been trying to track when our audiences started feeling different, more engaged somehow, like they're really seeing us, really connected to what we're doing on stage in a way that feels almost intimate. Audiences are always engaged, darling, Lucy said with gentle patience. That's rather the point of good theater. But this feels different, Chuck insisted, pulling out a small notebook filled with his cramped handwriting. More intense, like there are more eyes watching than should fit in the theater. I've been keeping track of applause patterns, laughter timing, even the way the silence feels during dramatic moments. Another small chill ran down Depsey's spine. Chuck's observations were getting uncomfortably close to something he didn't want to think about too deeply. Something about watching eyes and distant audiences that made his daily supplement feel suddenly insufficient. You're overthinking it, pal, he said, keeping his tone light and dismissive. Sometimes a good performance is just a good performance. The magic of theater, like Lucy said. Maybe, Chuck said, but his voice carried the stubborn note of someone who wasn't entirely convinced. I just feel like something's changing in the air, you know? Like we're on the verge of something bigger than just local theater. Something that could reach beyond our usual audiences. The stage manager's voice echoed down the hallway, cutting through their conversation. Chuck chatterbox to wardrobe. Final costume inventory before tomorrow's matinee. Chuck sighed dramatically, the sound of someone being pulled away from a fascinating discussion. All right, I suppose. But I really think there are patterns here worth exploring, connections worth making. He gave them both quick, enthusiastic hugs before bouncing toward the door, pausing at the threshold to add, and think about what I said about the broadcasting idea. Professor Gosling might be onto something truly revolutionary. After Chuck left, Lucy remained on the sofa, studying Depsey's face with the intensity of a director blocking a particularly crucial scene. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of the theater settling into its after-hours quiet. "He's not wrong, you know," she said thoughtfully, her voice taking on the contemplative tone she used when working through a particularly complex character motivation. "Something does feel different lately. The audiences, the energy in the theater. Even you seem different, darling." "Different how?" Depsey asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to hear the answer. "More nervous, more watchful, like in the basement. Like you're waiting for something to happen, or worried that something might." She rose gracefully from the sofa and moved to stand beside his makeup mirror, studying his reflection alongside his actual face. "Just promise me you'll get some proper rest. All this theoretical nonsense aside, you genuinely look like you need it." She leaned in to kiss his cheek, a gentle press of cool porcelain against his fur, but her eyes never stopped analyzing his expression with that uncomfortable perceptiveness that made him feel transparent. "And Depsey," she added, her voice soft but serious, "if something is troubling you, anything at all, you know Chuck and I are here for you, don't you? Whatever it is, whatever we have to do to keep you vibrant and humorous." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Depsey alone with the fluorescent buzz and the weight of his carefully maintained deceptions. He looked at himself in the makeup mirror, the face of a performer who'd just finished another successful show, surrounded by friends who cared about him, living a life that most cartoons would envy. So why did he feel like he was balanced on the edge of a cliff, one small push away from falling into something dark and inescapable? He moved to the bookshelf and looked at the old suitcase, his mother's legacy that now served as guardian to his deepest secret. Just knowing the jar was there, hidden and protected, made him feel safer. The doctor had been very specific about the daily dose, about the importance of consistency, about the protection it provided against things that ordinary cartoons didn't need to worry about. Through his small dressing room window, he could see the distant glow of the rift on the horizon, that magnificent, terrible phenomenon that dominated the cartoon world's landscape. Even from this distance, its swirling lights were mesmerizing, pulsing in patterns that scientists like Dr. Moose had spent their lives trying to understand. To most cartoons, it was a natural wonder, a source of awe and scientific fascination. To Depsey, it was a constant reminder of what he does, of all those who he'd disposed of in that terrible way, of the protection that this knowledge had brought him. Then a terrible thought crossed his mind. What if he wasn't a hitman? What if this was all in his mind and he was something more sinister, a deranged serial killer lying to himself? A shadow passed by his frosted glass door. Probably just another performer heading home after a long day of bringing joy to cartoon audiences. But for a moment, in the distorted light and wavering glass, it looked wrong somehow. Too tall, too angular, moving with a purposefulness that suggested it wasn't just wandering past. Depsey shook his head and began the familiar ritual of removing his stage makeup, using the routine motions to calm his nerves. Tomorrow would bring another performance, another day with Chuck and Lucy, another chance to perfect their craft and entertain their audiences. Whatever Chuck thought he was investigating, whatever patterns he imagined he was seeing in audience behavior, it was not even close to the real truth. A knowledge that Depsey could only see faintly. Some things were better left unexplored. Some questions were better left unasked. The shadow passed by his door again, and this time it seemed to pause, as if listening to the sounds from within his dressing room. When the shadow finally moved on, he exhaled slowly and focused on his makeup removal, trying not to think about watching red eyes or broadcasting waves, or the way his daily supplement sometimes gave him the strangest dreams, filled with green fog and falling figures and voices calling his name from impossible distances. Everything was perfectly normal. His career was thriving, his friendships were strong, and his protection was reliable. It had to be.